Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. First of all, let me wish you a very happy Independence Day. I know a lot of people are going to be traveling and at the beach or in the mountains, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Stay safe. Hope the weather's nice. And maybe you won't hear this show right away. Maybe you won't get to listen to it this week, but I wanted to go ahead and do it anyway because it's just part of what I do. It's part of my accountability to my audience is to do shows even on holidays when I don't think a whole lot of people are going to be hearing them. But hey, maybe I'll be surprised, right? And I also wanted to mention, if I think of it in time, I always call this holiday Independence Day, not just the 4th of July. I just don't like this important holiday being reduced to simple date on a calendar. It is, in fact, a very, very important holiday. I'm not directly related to Charles Carroll, but being a Carroll, I will claim Charles Carroll as kin, as all Southerners do. We can't claim everyone as kin. Charles Carroll was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was Irish. He was the only man brave enough to put his address under his name. And in retribution, the English decided to make an example of him. They burned his home, slaughtered his family, confiscated all his wealth. Uh, really, all of the signers of the Declaration of Independence faced similar persecution. I mean, their families were killed, some were hanged, uh, their homes were burned. The British were absolutely ruthless. They were not polite. I mean, if you ever look at, say, Cornwallis and such, these were really bloodthirsty, ruthless soldiers who had no qualms in slaughtering innocent civilians. Uh, in face of all that, our founders held strong. None of them turned away. Every one of them committed themselves to the liberties that we now take so far for granted, and we've left so many of them slip through our fingers. And I don't like that. It's just a shame. It's just more than a shame. It's a great disgrace of modern America. And interestingly enough, even though Charles Carroll was so bold as to essentially say to the English, "You know where I am, come get me," you know, he outlived all the other founders. He outlived all the other signers of the Declaration of Independence. And the Carrolls founded the Catholic Church in, I think it was in Baltimore. I mean, one of the most influential Catholic families in the entire country. And a lot of that history is certainly not taught in schools. In fact, what you're going to see now is, how horrible it was. A bunch of grannies went to the Capitol on the day Biden was announced to be the president and took selfies. The police opened the doors and welcomed them in, and now they're all rotting in jail, having been charged with an insurrection that never happened. In order to have an insurrection, you have to actually, like our founding fathers, take up arms, and they were unarmed. The only two people killed that day were two women. One, an Air Force veteran, was shot in the head or neck, depending on who you listen to, um, for no apparent reason. He was just shot and killed by an Capitol police officer. Another one was beaten to death by Capitol police officers for no apparent reason. Actually, that second one, they were kind of shoved into an area where they couldn't get out. The cops just started wailing away on them until one was beaten and suffocated and smothered to death and trampled. Again, not an insurrection. Our founding fathers actually were insurrectionists, and it cost many of them their lives. And speaking about lives being cost, I had a very interesting conversation with a doctor last week. It just started kind of out of the clear blue. We were talking and we just ran into each other, out and about. And he said, another wave of COVID seems to be coming through my neighborhood. And I said, oh, really? I hadn't heard about that. And he said, yeah, it's only affecting people who have been vaccinated and boosted once or twice. And I said, wow. And I used what they call the Moneyball quote. I just kind of laughingly said, because I didn't know where he stood on things. I said, it's like that quote from Moneyball. If he's a good hitter, why isn't he hitting? That's what the quote is. I said, if the vaccines work, why aren't they working? And he suddenly got very serious. And now this is a very intelligent, very educated, not from America, much better education than he would have received in a medical school in America, by the way, looks right at me and says, the vaccines never work. The vaccines are causing more sickness and death than the virus ever did. And he starts telling me about the Pfizer documents that Naomi Wolf and others have been going through that Pfizer didn't want to release, showing all the mortality related to vaccinations and sterility and problems with women's menstrual cycles and sperm decreases among men and miscarriage and just all kinds of horrible things that our government is trying so hard to suppress and keep us from knowing. And he started talking about things I've discussed with y'all before about the nature of these mRNA vaccines, how they work, and how they could never work to prevent a virus like COVID. And then he went into great detail explaining how this virus was made in a laboratory. He said, this is not a natural virus. And he went down the line. And we're standing in the hot sun. And for, a good 30, 45 minutes, went through in scientific detail a lot of the things we've been discussing. And then when I saw him again a few days later, I discussed herbs with him that I used. And I used when I had COVID, and I survived COVID, no problem. It was a flu. It was just a bad flu for me. If you're very young, very weak, very old. Actually, very young is not a comorbidity. Um, I think, let me see if I can remember the exact statistic. A child has less chance of dying from uh, COVID-19 or whatever you want to call this virus than of being struck by lightning. I mean, when you get to the statistics, you were talking like, I think it's like 2/100%. I mean, look it up and verify it. I'm just, talking from my memory right now. Healthy children, they do fine. They do fine in general. Yes, there are a few tragedies. Usually there was something other than just the virus that led to that child's death, and it's always a tragedy. And I'm not trying to minimize it in any way, but as we discussed before, it's the elderly that it hit the hardest. It's people with heart disease and diabetes. It's the very obese. And then there were a lot of problems with the numbers too. I mean, people, dying of like a heart attack that they would have had anyway. And if the if they also happen to have the COVID virus in their system and were completely asymptomatic, the hospitals were writing it up as a COVID death. And they also, I think it's what the CDC admitted, they grossly exaggerated the sickness and death rate among children. They had to totally revise that. Think about how willingly our nation gave up so much freedom over the past few years. I mean, we went from lockdowns, we went to vaccine mandates, forced injections, mask mandates, travel restrictions. Just incredible that over fear of a virus, we allowed this to happen. And what's even worse is that so much of our population is still willingly just going along with it. You know, I believe I believe this week decision has been made that the National Guard is going to fire almost 50,000 troops that refuse to get the vaccine. Apparently, they're more afraid of a virus than they are of, say, China invading Taiwan and getting us into a shooting war with the largest military on earth, or Russia hitting a NATO country in their battle with Ukraine, and us being drawn into a European conflict. We actually need to have a fighting force, and young, strong, healthy individuals that really have no concern over the virus whatsoever are being told, get the shot or you're out of the military. It's insane. It's pure insanity. When the American Revolution began, the first battles were won by, some of my ancestors. So these would be distant cousins. I'm claiming kin, right? Scots-Irish. The Scots-Irish that came into America, they were not welcome on the coast where the English had all the big plantations. They ended up going up to the mountains, and they became what were called over mountain men that lived over the mountain. Specifically, they had a large settlement at Sycamore Shoals near modern Elizabethton, Tennessee. They were fur traders, trappers, and moonshiners. And when the British sent a declaration saying, swear allegiance to the king or we're going to come kill you, well, they just picked up arms and walked literally on foot. Very few of them even had horses, from Tennessee to Kings Mountain, North Carolina, and backwoods hillbillies with flintlock rifles decimated and destroyed a modern British army of the day. That is what inspired George Washington to say, hey, we can actually win this war. We can actually win this war. You look at those battle tactics of guerrilla type warfare, of not lining up on a battlefield, shooting, next line comes up and shoots us, that one falls back, some reloads, and they just march across a field, in the mountains and rolling hills and swamps of much of North America, the wilderness that had not been, leveled and plowed and cleared of all trees. A more guerrilla type tactics worked. And that's really, how the war was won. Of course, there was a lot of help from France too. That's something they don't teach a lot in the history books either. But Lafayette was very close with Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, and they were able to bring the French Navy in to combat, to essentially block the British Navy. Had the French not helped out, our port cities really would have been destroyed by the British Navy no matter what. But imagine at that time, especially you think like Valley Forge in the middle of the winter, there were typhoid epidemics, there were smallpox epidemics. It would never have entered into George Washington or the other generals' minds to say, yeah, he has a virus, he can't fight. Send him home. If the man could pick up a gun and shoot, he was going to be part of that force. I don't think we have yet reached the luxury in our modern world where we can just give up our fighting force for the sake of, I guess, just being politically correct, because we know that most of those soldiers have no need of the vaccine in the first place. It's been proven over and over again that natural immunity is far more effective than the vaccine. It's being proven now the vaccines aren't really effective at all, and most of America has already had the virus. Most of those soldiers have already had the virus. And if they get it, they're strong and healthy anyway. So we live in a time of utter insanity. that's, the, that's the first obvious conclusion. But we also live in a time where we are just absolutely betraying the very things our founders fought and died and sacrificed for. So, yes, on this Independence Day, which go out, have a wonderful time, grill some hamburgers and hot dogs. I am a hot dog fanatic, by the way. I love it with sauerkraut and onions and strong mustard uh, and hot sauce. I always put hot sauce on there. I'm not like one of those competitive eater types, but trust me, I can eat some hot dogs. Have a great time. Get out in the sun, enjoy your family, enjoy the fireworks. But maybe when you come back from the vacation, it's time to kind of think a little bit about, like I said, at Memorial Day, are we honoring the legacies of our ancestors? Are we living for what they died for? That's grammatically incorrect, but you know what I mean. Are we living for the things for which they died? That's better. Um, so I just thought I'd put that out. And again, I just want to wish you a very happy Independence Day. Just please don't forget it is actually Independence Day. Now let's get into the herbs. I'm going to talk about this one. I've already got my tongue twisted a couple of times just doing this intro, but I'm going to talk about the worst tongue twister herb for me. It is Centaury, Centaury. I have so much trouble not saying century. It's Centauri, not century. The Latin word is Centaureum erythraea. That's almost as difficult, but it's a very important bitter herb, commonly used in European herbalism. Doesn't get used a lot in American herbalism, and I'm not sure why, because it grows over a very large range. I mean, naturally, you will find Centauri from Scotland to the Mediterranean, North Africa, and to West Asia. Uh, it's really widespread, and it can certainly be grown in just about any garden in North America. If you've heard of Centauri before, you probably have heard of it as an ingredient in tisane. Now, tisane actually goes back to at least ancient Greece. If you read Hippocrates' work, the Hippocratic Corpus and all, you will see that the remedy he most often recommended was tisane. But in his time, tisane was essentially an oat or barley water. Uh, Essentially, this was a time, when people had a lot of dysentery and they would get very weak in whatever disease. It could be just plain food poison or bad water, or they could have a really bad virus. And from, vomiting and diarrhea and just not being able to keep anything in, they would get very weak. So the tisane, which was just essentially barley water or an oat water, would help give them a little nutrition, and reinvigorate them, get their digestive system working a little bit better in a very mild way. But eventually, and over the years, over the centuries, I guess I should say, tisane began to be known as synonymous with herbal teas. And there are several specific tisane formulas that are widely enjoyed in Europe. Uh, most I think probably most common, I would say, is the one they drink a lot in France, which is made with linden flowers or basswood flowers. That's one of the herbs in it. You may have, if you're a fan of Agatha Christie's Poirot, whenever he would go to a restaurant, he would order tisane, and basically no one knew what he was talking about. And it was just an herbal tea. And it could be made with a variety of herbs. There are many different herbs. One of the main herbs used in tisane is Centaury. Centaury is a member of the gentian family. Now, I told you before, gentian is the king of the bitter herbs. It is not only bitter to the taste, it stimulates digestion from saliva to gastric juices. It helps balance blood sugar. It has an effect on the pancreas and gallbladder. It's very good for the liver. Gentian helps lower fevers. It has many, many uses, and gentian is one of the primary herbs used in herbal medicine, really. Centaury is part of that family, and it was well known in ancient Greece as well. Dioscorides recommended it pounded while still green and applied to seal wounds and purge old ulcers, bringing them to a scar. Boiled down and swallowed, he said it expels bile and thick fluid through the bowels. A decoction of it is a fit suppository for sciatica. I have no idea how that works. He said it draws blood and eases pain, drawing out blood and easing pain. I don't really know how that would work with sciatica, but again, this is ancient Greece. He said it would bring on menses. He said, taken as a drink, it is equally good for disorders of strength. I think he was saying basically it was a tonic. And then, of course, from the ancient Greek and Roman traditions, we start getting into the monastic medicine of the Middle Ages. And then things get a little bit confusing because apparently the herb cornflower had a similar name. And it's very hard to tell, like in the writings of St. Hildegard von Bingen and such, whether she's referring to centaury or cornflower, which we commonly in America call bachelor's buttons. It's just a pretty common ornamental little flower, very pretty little flower. So I can't tell you exactly how Centaury was used in the monastic medicine of the Middle Ages, but I do know that it was used. And when we start getting up into um, the later monastic medicine, that tradition that had become German folk medicine at the time, we get to Father Nape, who in my water cure did list the proper century and gave a German name for it that would be even harder to pronounce. And I know my Austrian friend Jolanta is going to laugh at this, but I'm going to try Tossenguldenkraut. Tossenguldenkraut. Literally, he says that means the thousand florin herb. He says our little flower must have occupied a high social position in the herbal world of those bygone days. He says it tastes bitter, and its mission, employed as a tea, is to resolve the stomach of superfluous winds. He means it produces gas. To restore the digestive saps, he means stimulate the digestive juices, and it acts upon the liver and the kidneys. It acts upon the liver and the kidneys. It is the best remedy for heartburn. And he said sufferers from derangement of circulation may seek counsel and help from the little herb. Unfortunately, I do not know what derangement of circulation is, but he certainly used it as a stomatic and digestive. And Father Kunzel over in Switzerland said internally one uses the tea for croup, sore throat, bladder ailments, light diarrhea, sleeplessness. But for internal use, one should always use the same amount of juniper berries and common century. Take half a cup 3 to 5 times a day. 4 parts of goldenrod and 1 part of juniper berries or common century. So he was using the juniper or century interchangeably. And this one, he said, makes a good, completely harmless drink for good sleep half an hour before going to bed. Century works for reflux. So, and a lot of times if you do have reflux or heartburn, that can be one of the main causes of sleeplessness. So I'm not sure if he was actually using it as a sedative or if he was using it to settle the stomach before one goes. Now, in the British tradition, Gerard in the 1500s said the root taken in the quantity of 2 drams is good for them that be bursten or spit blood against the cramp and the shrinking of sinews, shortness of wind, or difficulty of breathing, the cough and the gripings of the belly. So that be burst, and we're talking an internal hemorrhage, and of course that would go along with the spitting blood. That's a new use on this one. Not seeing earlier herbals for shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, coughs. We would certainly expect the gripings of the belly, stomach cramps. He also recommended highly, said it worked miracles, in fact, for joining together simple wounds in the flesh, small cuts and such. That's interesting. I guess it would have maybe an astringency when used in that way. And he said the whole plant was good for that. Now, much later in the British tradition, 400 years later almost, uh, Bisgreave said that the herb was thought to be the Gravelentia centaurea of Virgil. So I did not know Virgil had mentioned it, but we now think that Virgil may have been quite adept in the medicine of the area. Research has shown that he may have been trained as a physician, by the way, to which Lucretius gives the more significant epithet of Tristia in reference to the same intense bitterness. As this bitterness had a healing and tonic effect attributed to it, we sometimes find the century called febrifugia and feverwort. So, like the gentian, it would help reduce fevers. It is popularly known as Christ's ladder, and the name Centaury has become corrupted in Worcestershire. I think that's how you pronounce that. I know my British friends are going to give me a little grief on that. It's the same town for which we have our Worcester sauce or Worcestershire sauce. It's spelled Worcestershire, but of course they don't pronounce all the syllables. And she says there it's known as Center of the Sun. It is a rather pretty flower, so I can kind of see where it gets that name. She also says in a translation of an old medieval Latin poem of the 10th century by Macer, there is mention of century being powerful against wicked spirits. So, It does have a little bit of a religious connotation. Like I said, it was called Christ's ladder in some of the traditions. But she says, of all the bitter, appetizing wild herbs which serve as an excellent simple tonic, the Centaury is the most efficacious. It shares the antiseptic virtues of gentian and buckbeam. She lists the medicinal actions and uses as an aromatic bitter, stomachic, and tonic. It acts on the liver and kidneys, purifies the blood, and is an excellent tonic. And when she's saying tonic, I believe she's talking really about more strengthening digestion. But if it also has those effects of being antiseptic and lowering fevers, it would make you feel, overall better. So she also quoted Culpeper, who wrote in the 1600s, who said that the herb is so safe that you cannot fail in the using of it. Only give it inwardly for inward diseases and outwardly for outward diseases. This is a very wholesome but not very toothsome herb, which means very good for you but not very tasty. He recommended it for dropsy, which is edema, the green sickness, being much used by the Italians in a powder for that purpose. Not sure exactly what the green sickness was. It could have been one of several things, but he said it kills worms and was good to clear the eyes from dimness, mists, and clouds that offend or hinder the sight. And for doing that, he said the juice of the herb with a little honey applied to the eye would help. That would be interesting. That could be. There are several herbs that have been used throughout the centuries for, cataracts and cloudy vision and all that. Um, Sometimes they say to make a juice of something and drop it directly into the eye. Other times, like St. Hildegard would say, take petals of violets and just put them on your eyelids while you sleep. A lot of experimentation should go into that because, obviously those are still conditions that plague us to this day. And, modern medicine doesn't offer a lot of solutions. We have cataract surgery and various things, but if there are some herbs, I think a lot of the rose family astringent herbs have been used for that purpose to help clear the vision. And, they reduce inflammation. And I think it definitely stands looking into. And let's see, Culpeper said it was really good for wounds, green and fresh wounds. So by green, I'm thinking he meant infected, and maybe that green sickness he was talking about was gangrene, could be. And he said it was also good for old ulcers and sores, that it helped heal and close them up, and for fistulas. It was particularly good for fistulas. And interestingly enough, he also recommended to take away freckles, spots, and marks on the skin. So that's a use I hadn't seen else. And additionally, she says that the ancient Saxon herbalists used Centaury for snake bites and other poisons. And it is one of the herbs that is included in several of those cure-all type poison remedies that were popular in the Middle Ages that really are the ancestors of our modern day digestive and cocktail bitters. In more modern use, of course, Plants for the Future says that Centaury is one of the most useful bitter herbs. Centaury strengthens digestive function, especially within the stomach. By increasing stomach secretions, it hastens the breakdown of food. It also stimulates the appetite and increases bile production. The plant needs to be taken over a number of weeks, and an infusion should be slowly sipped so that the components can stimulate reflex activity through the upper digestive tract. The whole herb is an appetizer, aromatic, bitter, cholagogue, diaphoretic, digestive, emetic, weakly febrifuge, hepatic, stomachic, and tonic. It acts on the liver and the kidneys, purifies the blood, and is an excellent tonic for the digestive system. Externally, the fresh green herb is said to be a good application to wounds and sores. It is often used in combination with other herbs such as chamomile, meadowsweet, and marshmallow. The whole plant is harvested when in flower and can be dried for later use. And they also mentioned the flower is used in the Bach flower remedies. The key words for prescribing it are weak-willed or too easily influenced, and a willing servitor. Now, Bach flower remedies are very interesting. They don't, eh, very different philosophy in the way I use herbs. Okay, as you can see, I don't really think of herbs as being used for someone who's weak-willed or too easily influenced. Bach flower remedies are somewhat associated with homeopathy. They share sort of a similar tradition, and the homeopathic remedy uh, using Centaury is used for the treatment of liver and gallbladder ailments. So you see, the Bach flower remedies tend to be more focused on somewhat, you might say, emotional states, and some of them are quite good. Some people really swear by like the rescue remedy, but that's not my tradition. It's not something I really get into. Whereas homeopathy, I can wrap my mind around a lot better. Now, several sources do say that Centaury is not native to North America, but that it has been naturalized. And some people even think of it as invasive, which I think is ridiculous. As I've said before, um, people can get really over the edge on native plants. And the truth is, there is no such thing as a native plant. The question you have to ask is native to when, as the saying goes in permaculture. When was this plant introduced? Nothing that's growing here now has always been growing here now. At some point, the seeds were carried in the wind or a bird. I mean, plants move with migrations of people and animals all throughout the world. So when we talk about invasive plants, I think it's a little bit overblown. Obviously, when it comes to something like kudzu, that's going to take over a whole area and strangle out all the native plant life on there, yeah, you really have to worry about that a lot. But of course, if we use kudzu more for food, which is an excellent food, like I've said before, the leaves are edible. They actually contain a little protein. It makes for an excellent hay for cows and other animals, grazing animals, goats especially. Flowers can be used for wine and jelly. The root is strongly medicinal. Kudzu root has a unique ability to help an alcoholic not to crave alcohol. I mean, we could really be making a lot of use of kudzu, and it can even be used as fibers. It makes like a very nice linen, etc. But people just see it as a weed and spray Roundup on it and try to kill it back. And yeah, that's kind of ridiculous. It's a losing battle. You're never going to win that battle. Whereas if you use the plant as intended, as food and medicine and fiber and even compost, I mean, chop that stuff up and you've got a ton of matter that can rot down into a nice compost or be used dried and used as mulch. We're going to get along with our plants a lot better, and we're not going to be so worried about weeds and invasives and all that. But anyway, I'll just give a little shout out to good old Channing Cope. Channing Cope wrote the book called Front Porch Farmer and popularized the planting of kudzu to use to feed cattle and help prevent erosion in the South. Unfortunately, as I've mentioned before, our government took his plan of using kudzu to help prevent erosion because the South was literally washing away. I mean, the South was almost like the Dust Bowl. It was almost that bad before Channing Cope came up with this idea of using kudzu. Well, the government took it and just kind of put it on all the roadsides and stream banks, and kudzu became the vine that ate the South. Unfortunately, Channing Cope got blamed for it as opposed to bad government policy, as one might expect given recent events and how the media spins things. So rest in peace, Channing Cope. He was a permaculture artisan before his time and very misunderstood, and a great Southern storyteller and big personality, a real character. And he was from Georgia and really interesting guy. Don't forget, please buy my books. They're on Amazon. And I am trying to put together a schedule for the plant walks. If you're interested in going out with me on a plant walk, I'll take you out on a nice safe trail and identify plants and tell you how they're used medicinally and edibly. I'd like to do about one a month. Email me, Southern Appalachian Herbs at gmail.com or Judson at judsoncarroll.com, and I'll keep you updated on the schedule. So y'all have a wonderful 4th of July weekend. Yes, I said it. Independence Day weekend. Have a wonderful Independence Day every day, keeping in mind that freedoms are given to us by God, not granted by government. That is the revolutionary idea of the American Revolution. So y'all have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.